Hi, I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm glad that you are participating in a conversation in this workshop about people who live beyond the binary of black and white. They will tell you their own stories and experiences of being neither black nor white, being mixed race, being culturally hybrid. The problem with binary thinking is that two things are considered opposite, irreconcilable, completely different. And historically, these binaries have been used to allocate rights and respect. Gender is another binary that, with patriarchal systems, men were granted power and access that women did not have. So, deconstructing binaries is very important so that we can get a sense of the fuller human picture. So, today, people who identify as trans or gender nonconforming. Similarly, there are many, many people who are neither black nor white, whose stories get obscured, who don't get reckoned with when we need to understand the real path to racial justice in the United States. Of course, it makes sense. The United States is a country that has been founded on racialized narratives. And when I use the word racialized, what I mean by that is over time, what different categories have meant has changed. So we know this is not static. We know that this is not unchanging. That in fact, ideas about race have been justifications for oppression. Notions about noble savages who needed to be saved, liberated, justified, were used as explanations for how to treat indigenous native people when European colonizers encountered them. What ideas the colonizers brought with them changed over time, and certainly the wealth and status as a superpower of the United States was founded on the major racial idea of blackness as lesser, to justify the oppressive systems of slavery. And as books like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow Show, and many other people are continuing to point out, that legacy of racializing, of creating a hierarchy between black and white, with black always at the bottom, and according to white supremacy, whiteness as the sign of civilization and the best that society had to offer, became a self-reinforcing racial narrative and story. And so it makes sense that when we think of the United States, both blackness and whiteness have been the defining characteristics. Toni Morrison has pointed out how all of our major literature in some ways has been a confrontation with what the oppression and enslavement and brutal treatment over centuries of black bodies has contributed to both the material wealth of this country and to its continuing efforts to justify inhumane treatment. At the same time, from the native peoples who were treated to genocide to today, there are many people in the United States who are neither black nor white. Asians have been in the United States for hundreds of years, people from different parts of Europe and the Middle East. And we know that, for example, certain categories of Europeans were considered black. So we've seen that even that category has shifted in different ways to justify enslavement. The one drop rule was one example of a measurement of how much supposed black blood one had. These all became real in their impact, even though they were fabricated, that the assumptions about race, we don't have scientific evidence, but there was a kind of attempt to look for purity. That means that if you're neither black nor white in terms of being mixed or multiracial, a lot of people in America often ask, what are you? Which is dehumanizing to begin with, but the people who defy the categories that are the most common often find themselves to not be understood. Sometimes they are asked to choose. That if for immigrants who are coming from different parts of the world, like the Irish, to be more associated with whiteness rather than blackness became one of the choices that was presented to get political representation. And so these are really important stories, and even as we work in Pittsburgh and around the country and around the world to really repair the damages of white supremacy that have particularly harmed Black people, we also have to attend and reconcile our notions of racial identities that are beyond the binary. And this conversation has to happen simultaneously, that we need to both work against anti-Blackness all the time, consistently in the U.S., because we find by every structural statistical measure that being Black is a good predictor, unfortunately, of terrible outcomes. At the same time, we can't dehumanize anyone whose identity doesn't fit in this black-white binary by overlooking their very real experiences and the complexity and their ability perhaps to tell us about our society. And in the end, both to recognize these experiences, but to build coalitions and to act in solidarity, that our enemy, if I can use hyperbolic language, is white supremacy, and that if we can find ways to come together and continue to reject that in all the spaces we're in, that's our path to racial justice. Thank you for letting me participate.